wind howled through the empty streets of the Bavarian countryside, carrying with it a chilling whisper, a secret that had been buried for decades. On the outskirts of town, a farmhouse stood dark and silent, its windows empty eyes staring into the night. Inside, something was stirring, a presence that had waited too long to be disturbed. And tonight, the door would open, and the shadows would speak. Chapter 1. The case arrives. The fog clung to the windows of the brownstone office like the memory of a forgotten dream, thick and restless, with the evening chill creeping in under the door. I had just finished my lunch, a delicate combination of roast duck and a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, when the telegram arrived, delivered by none other than my assistant, Archie Goodwin. He strode in, as confident and as unflappable as ever, his brow furrowed slightly in curiosity as he handed me the slip of yellowed paper. "Telegram for you, boss," Archie said, his voice tinged with a note of intrigue, as if he expected something dramatic to follow. I glanced at the sender's name and the brief, terse message scrawled across the page. The handwriting was familiar, old-fashioned and precise. It was from an old acquaintance of mine, a former police official in Bavaria named von Totenbaum. His name had been one I'd long forgotten, until now. He had contacted me once before, on a minor case involving counterfeit antiquities. At the time, he'd proven himself both competent and diligent. But this new message was different. This one spoke of a crime so disturbing it had shaken the quiet village to its core. The telegram read, "Nero Wolfe. A grisly crime has occurred at the Hinterkaifeck farmstead in the Bavarian countryside. A family of 6 murdered. No clear culprit, no motive, no witnesses. Only a maid survives. Authorities are baffled. Please come urgently. Von Totenbaum." I put the telegram down on my desk slowly, a thick, contemplative silence filling the room. It was not the sort of case I usually entertained, especially not one so far from New York. But the lack of clarity, the absence of motive, the gruesome nature of the crime, all of it pulled at something within me. It wasn't the crime itself that intrigued me. It was the puzzle, and puzzles, as I've always maintained, are what I do best. Archie, ever perceptive, caught the shift in my demeanor. "I take it that's not a vacation request," he said with a wry grin, already knowing my penchant for turning down unwelcome travel unless the case was particularly challenging. I gave him a look. Vacation? Number. A puzzle, however, is something else entirely. I stood, the creaking of my chair loud in the quiet room. "Arrange for our departure, Archie. We'll leave at once. It seems I have a mystery in the fog to unravel. The train journey to Bavaria was long and dreary, the landscape rolling past us in varying shades of green and grey. My thoughts were occupied with the telegram and the details it hadn't mentioned. 6 victims, a family, a maid who survived. No witnesses, no suspects. The kind of case that could either be an open and shut affair or a complete enigma. The circumstances sounded almost too bizarre to believe. When we finally reached the small, isolated village where the Hinterkaifeck farmstead stood, the town's isolation was immediately apparent. The air was heavy with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional gust of wind rustling through the bare trees. The place felt like it had been forgotten by time, as though the world outside had never fully grasped the gravity of what occurred here. Von Totenbaum met us at the train station. His tall, gaunt figure stood in stark contrast to the surroundings, his eyes hollow, dark and tired, undoubtedly burdened by the horrors he'd witnessed. He offered a curt handshake and led us to the farmhouse. As we drove through the winding roads, passing stone cottages and half-snow-covered fields, I noticed the peculiar tension in the air. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. A quiet, suffocating kind of atmosphere. The silence felt unnerving. I could tell this place had been marked by something that hadn't yet been cleansed, something that still lingered, like a shadow. The farmhouse was situated on the edge of a thick forest, isolated from the nearest neighbours, with a large barn at its side. It looked ancient, its timbers weathered and worn, its structure sagging slightly as if time had been too heavy a burden. Snow covered the ground, the world around it a monochrome of white and grey, with only the twisted shapes of trees breaking the stark horizon. "It's strange, isn't it?" Archie muttered as we stepped out of the car, his breath visible in the cold air. "This place feels wrong." I didn't answer immediately. I was too focused on the house in front of me. It was exactly what one would expect of a farmhouse, but there was something about the stillness, the way the walls seemed to draw inward, that made it feel unnervingly foreboding. The house had a way of pulling you in, suffocating you with its presence. This, I thought, would be no ordinary case. Von Totenbaum led us inside. The first thing that struck me was the oppressive quiet. No sounds, not even from the servants or the family members. Just the distant echo of our footsteps on the floorboards. We entered the sitting room, where the grisly details of the crime were laid bare. The police had already done their part, but there was something in the air that suggested they had been as lost as everyone else. I looked at the faces of the officers, all tense, confused, as if they couldn't quite believe the horror they'd uncovered. The atmosphere was thick with the sense of an unsolvable puzzle. "It was a bloodbath," von Totenbaum said, his voice low. "They were all killed in their sleep. No forced entry, no struggle, just slaughter." The room smelled faintly of something stale, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was as though the house had absorbed the violence, and it was now part of the air itself. I surveyed the room with methodical precision, noting the oddness of the scene. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. It was a crime that seemed to mock logic. But that was precisely what intrigued me. I turned to von Totenbaum. "Who found the bodies?" "The maid. She was the only one who survived. She claims she didn't hear anything, but when she woke up, she found the family slaughtered in their beds." "Interesting," I murmured, considering this. "We need to speak to her." But the maid was no ordinary witness, and I had a feeling she held more answers than she was letting on. Chapter 2. A dark arrival. The Hinterkaifeck farmhouse loomed before us like a monument to isolation, its weathered walls pressing inward as though they were silently choking on the past. The air was still, too still. Nothing stirred except the occasional flicker of dead leaves caught in a gust of wind. For a moment I almost felt as if we had stepped through a time portal to a place that existed outside the boundaries of normalcy. As we approached, von Totenbaum led us up the stone path, his steps heavy with the burden of the unsolved mystery. The house was eerily silent, not even the usual sounds of animals in a farmhouse. The only noise was the distant whisper of the wind rustling through the bare trees that stood like sentinels around the property. It seemed as though the world had frozen in place, holding its breath in anticipation. Inside, the house exuded a palpable sense of decay, but it wasn't the kind of decay that one would expect from an old, abandoned building. No, this was something different, a quiet, oppressive kind of degradation, as if the walls themselves had been stained by the tragedy that unfolded here. I couldn't help but notice how cold it was, the kind of cold that cuts through you, even when you're wrapped in layers of clothing. It wasn't the sort of chill that could be explained by the weather alone. It was the kind of cold that settles deep inside, like a phantom that never leaves. It matched the silence, the unease that clung to the house like a second skin. "Not much has changed," von Totenbaum muttered, almost to himself as he led us through the narrow hallways. The place is as it was the night of the murders. We passed rooms with worn furniture, faded curtains, and the remnants of a life that had been brutally ripped away. The walls were adorned with old family portraits, haunting reminders of the people who had once lived here. Their painted eyes seemed to follow us, the ghosts of the past watching from the shadows. As we made our way through the dimly lit corridors, we came to the parlour, where the bodies had been discovered. The room was sterile now, cleared of any evidence, save for a few scattered items that had been left behind. A rocking chair sat motionless in the corner, its wooden arms smoothed from years of use. The fireplace, once a source of warmth, now stood empty, the cold hearth mocking the emptiness of the space. Here, von Totenbaum gestured to the far side of the room where the bodies had been found. This is where it happened. The room was too quiet, too calm. It was as if nothing violent had ever occurred here, and yet the very air was thick with the echoes of the past. I could almost hear the muffled sounds of the family's last breaths, their final desperate moments. The victims were killed while they slept, von Totenbaum continued, his voice low and steady. Throats slit with a precision that suggests this was no random attack. I approached the fireplace, examining the floor with careful deliberation. It was spotless, too spotless. The kind of spotless you only find in places where the cleaning is obsessive or where something has been deliberately scrubbed away. But what? What had been removed and why? I knelt down, inspecting the hearth for any trace of blood or other evidence that had been missed. No signs of a struggle, I muttered to myself. Nothing. Archie, ever the pragmatic one, let out a low whistle. So the family just died in their sleep. No fight, no cries for help. Precisely, I replied. No signs of panic, no defensive wounds. Everything about this case points to something carefully orchestrated. We moved through the house, each room a new puzzle piece to the mystery. But there was something else, something that gnawed at the edges of my mind, something that wasn't quite right. As we reached the staircase, von Totenbaum spoke again, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. There is something else, Wolf. Something that doesn't fit. The maid. She claims to have seen no one, but she also mentions hearing strange noises the night of the murders. I raised an eyebrow. Strange noises? Yes, he nodded. She said she heard something from the attic. The sound of movement, but when she checked, she saw nothing. No one was there, and yet she heard something. Exactly, von Totenbaum said. She insists she saw no one, but the noise was unmistakable. This was the first crack in the case, a hint of something more beneath the surface. If there had been no one in the house, then where had the noise come from? Had it been the murderer, hiding in the attic? Or was there another explanation altogether? I glanced up at the attic door, which stood at the far end of the hall. The door was old, its wood warped with age, but it was locked tight. I could feel the weight of it, the heavy silence that seemed to come from above. We'll need to check the attic, I said, already making my way toward the stairs. Archie followed close behind, his brow furrowed in thought. You think the murderer was hiding up there? I think the attic may hold the key to everything, I replied, my voice cool and calculated. If someone had been living there, as the maid suggests, then they would have had access to the house without anyone knowing. The attic stairs creaked beneath our feet as we ascended into the darkness. The air grew colder, more oppressive with every step. I was becoming increasingly aware of the sense of being watched, as if the house itself were scrutinizing our every move. When we reached the top, I reached for the door handle, only to find it locked from the inside. It wasn't a simple latch, but a sturdy bolt that kept us out. I turned to von Totenbaum, who had followed us up, his face tight with concern. "We'll need a key," I said, my voice calm. But von Totenbaum shook his head. "No key. The door was locked when we found it, and we haven't been able to open it since. It's as though someone wanted to keep us out." I regarded the door thoughtfully. Someone definitely didn't want us to see inside. It seemed we were getting closer, but there were still far too many questions and far too few answers. As I stood there staring at the door to the attic, I knew one thing for certain. The secrets of the Hinterkaifeck murders were hidden in that room, and it was up to me to uncover them. With a nod to Archie, I motioned for him to fetch the tools we would need to force the door open. Time was slipping away, and every moment brought us closer to the truth, or deeper into the web of lies and deception that had led to the brutal deaths of the family. But the attic would give us our first glimpse of what had really happened on that fateful night. Chapter 3. The puzzle pieces. The air in the attic was thick with dust and the scent of decay, the kind of musty, old house smell that seems to hang in every corner. The wooden beams creaked underfoot as Archie and I climbed into the room, our flashlights slicing through the darkness. We were met with an eerie silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what we would uncover. The light flickered as I moved deeper into the room, casting long, jagged shadows against the cracked walls. The attic wasn't much to look at. Bare beams crisscrossed the ceiling, old trunks were scattered about, and broken furniture was strewn across the floor. A few torn curtains fluttered in the slight draft from the small, high window, but other than that, it looked like a forgotten space. Yet, as my eyes scanned the room, I noticed something strange. On the far wall, barely visible through the haze of dust, were marks, scratches and faint impressions in the wood that seemed deliberate. As I moved closer, I could make out a set of symbols etched into the wall. The faint glow of my flashlight revealed that they weren't random. These were carefully drawn, almost ritualistic in nature. My stomach tightened as I recognized them. These were the same symbols mentioned in the victim's family diary. I looked over at Archie, who had been quietly surveying the room. He had noticed the same thing. "Wolf, you see this?" Archie's voice was low, almost reverent. "It's like someone carved this stuff here deliberately." "Precisely," I said, stepping forward to get a closer look. "These are no mere scribbles. They are part of something larger, something intentional." I knelt down, examining the symbols. The marks were fresh, too fresh. I could tell by the way the wood had been scraped that someone had only recently etched these symbols into the wall. The patterns weren't just random. They followed a specific, deliberate order, as though they were part of a ritual. My mind clicked. This wasn't just a simple murder. It was part of something much deeper. We're dealing with something far more complicated than just a family slaughtered in their sleep. I muttered to myself. "There's a message here, Archie, and someone's been leaving it for us." Archie crouched beside me, eyes narrowing as he traced the symbols with his fingers. "Do you think this is connected to the murders?" "I have no doubt," I said, my voice hardening. "Whoever killed the family didn't just want to end their lives. They wanted something else. They wanted to send a message. And these symbols are part of that message." I stood up, moving away from the wall to look around the rest of the room. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that anyone had been hiding here for long, but there was something unsettling about the room. The silence was oppressive, and the strange feeling that we weren't alone here seemed to grow stronger with every passing second. "This is uncomfortable," Archie said, breaking the silence. "It feels like someone's been living up here, even if they weren't visible." I nodded, unable to shake the feeling that we had just stepped into the heart of something far more sinister. The maid mentioned hearing noises from this attic the night of the murders, but no one ever saw anything. "That's not right, Archie. We're missing something, and it's right here." We both moved around the attic, careful not to disturb anything too much. At the far end of the room, I found a small, rusted iron lockbox. It was hidden behind some old crates, and there was something about it that made me pause. The lock looked newer than the rest of the room, its metal gleaming faintly in the light. I motioned to Archie, who gave me a nod of understanding. He fetched a tool from his bag, and within moments, we had the lock pried open. Inside, there was a collection of old, faded papers. My fingers brushed over them as I carefully pulled them free. They were handwritten in a delicate, flowing script, German, as expected. But what struck me wasn't the language, it was the content. The papers were filled with more of the same symbols I had seen earlier, carefully documented, almost obsessive in their precision. As I flipped through them, I realized they weren't just notes. They were instructions. The symbols seemed to correspond to specific rituals of some long-forgotten nature, tied to ancient beliefs and rites. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was looking at, a manual for some sort of occult ceremony. Whoever had been behind this, they weren't just killing for the sake of it. They were following a pattern, a ritualistic sequence designed to invoke something. But what? I turned to Archie, whose face had gone pale as he skimmed the papers. "This is bigger than we thought, Archie," I said, my voice quiet. This wasn't just about revenge or greed or any of the usual motives. This was planned. Archie shook his head, a grim expression crossing his features. "You're saying the murder was part of some cult ritual? That's insane, Wolf." I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I continued to sift through the papers, each word seeming to lead me down a darker, more twisted path. The further I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a murder, it was a sacrifice. A loud creak from the far side of the room interrupted my thoughts. I stiffened, my pulse quickening. Archie glanced up at me, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun, but I motioned for him to hold back. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Archie nodded, his eyes darting toward the shadows. "I heard it." "Something's moving." I slowly stood, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. The air felt thick with tension, and the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Whoever, or whatever, had been hiding here, they were close. I turned to face the corner of the attic, my hand reaching for the small, rusted weapon I always carried in situations like this. The air crackled with a strange energy, a presence that I couldn't place. It was as if the room itself was waiting for something that hadn't yet happened. "Stay close," I whispered to Archie, my mind racing with the implications of what we had just uncovered. There was something, or someone, in this house that was far more dangerous than I had initially realized. As we cautiously moved toward the corner, the shadows seemed to move with us, as if they were alive. And I realized in that moment that the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse held secrets deeper than any of us could have anticipated, and we were about to uncover them, whether we were ready or not. The presence we had sensed was still there, waiting. And whatever it wasn't going to let us leave without revealing the rest of the story. Chapter 4. The Web of Secrets. The attic was silent once again, the only sound the faint rustling of old papers as I turned them over, piecing together fragments of an occult ritual that had been part of the family's dark history. My mind was racing, piecing together the pieces of a puzzle that was becoming more complex by the minute. The symbols, the instructions, the lockbox. None of it made sense, at least not yet. Archie stood near the window, scanning the farmstead below, his eyes narrowed in concentration. I could tell he was uneasy. This place had that effect on people, and I wasn't immune to it either. But I had a job to do, and I intended to finish it. "We're missing something," I muttered, more to myself than to Archie. "This ritual. It's more than just a random series of murders. It's a calculated act, something with purpose. These symbols, they were meant to summon something. But what?" Archie turned from the window, looking at me with a mixture of confusion and skepticism. Summon what? And why the hell would anyone think killing a family could accomplish that? "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out," I replied. "Let's go back to the house, search the rest of the rooms and see if we can find any other clues. The answers we're looking for are hidden here. I'm certain of it." As we made our way back downstairs, the oppressive atmosphere of the house seemed to close in around us, making every step feel heavier than the last. The stale air pressed against my chest as though the house itself was trying to keep us in, to prevent us from discovering the truth. But I wasn't about to be deterred. We moved through the house, methodically searching for anything that could give us more insight into what had happened here. The rooms were still eerily quiet. The walls whispered secrets, but none were forthcoming. Each corner we turned seemed to open up into more confusion. It wasn't until we reached the study that things began to make more sense. There, hidden beneath a pile of old books, I found a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. This was no ordinary diary. This one had been carefully hidden, deliberately kept from view. I couldn't help but feel that this journal, this one, might hold the key to understanding everything. I opened it carefully, my fingers brushing the pages as I scanned the writing. It was in the same flowing script as the papers we had found in the attic, but this was more personal. The journal belonged to one of the victims, Carl, the father of the family. He had written about his experiences with the symbols, describing his growing obsession with the occult. His entries grew darker with each passing day, his words becoming more erratic and disjointed. At first, Carl had been curious about the symbols, fascinated by their historical significance. But as time went on, he became consumed by them, convinced that they held the key to some great power. The further I read, the clearer it became that Carl had fallen under the spell of whatever dark force he had encountered. He had begun to speak of sacrifices and rites of passage, each one more disturbing than the last. "I didn't want to believe it," I muttered, staring at the pages in disbelief. "But it's all here." Carl was planning something. He was involved in these rituals. He knew what he was doing. Archie's voice was tinged with disbelief as he stepped closer, reading over my shoulder. "Are you telling me that this family was involved in some cult stuff? That they were planning to... what? Bring something into this world?" I nodded, unable to tear my eyes from the journal. "Yes, Archie. That's exactly what I'm saying." Carl's journal spoke of an impending ritual. A ritual that was to be completed with the blood of the family. It was supposed to summon something, an ancient entity that had been long forgotten by time. But it wasn't just the family's deaths that would complete the ritual. No, the deaths had to be perfect, conducted with the utmost precision to ensure the entity's arrival. But then something strange happened. As I read the final entry in the journal, I could sense the change in Carl's tone. He had begun to doubt the ritual's efficacy. The closer he got to completing it, the more unsure he became. His last words were chilling. "I thought I could control it. I thought the power would be mine. But the shadows grow stronger now, and I can hear it whispering in the dark. It is coming. I do not know if we will survive the night. The final entry was dated just days before the murders. Whatever Carl was involved in, it's clear he became a victim of it, I said quietly. He was trying to summon something far beyond him, something evil. Archie stood back, digesting the implications. And you think whoever did this was trying to finish what Carl started? I nodded. It's the only explanation that makes sense. The murder wasn't random. It was part of a larger plan, a plan that Carl had started but couldn't complete. But there was still one unanswered question that gnawed at me. If Carl had started the ritual, why had the family been killed before the ritual was finished? Was someone else trying to complete it? Or was there another, more sinister force at play? Before I could contemplate further, a low, muffled sound echoed from the hallway. Archie and I exchanged a look, both of us immediately alert. The house had grown even more oppressive since we'd come downstairs. Every step we took now seemed to be echoed by something unseen, something following us. I don't like this, Wolf, Archie muttered, reaching for his gun. Stay calm, Archie, I said, though I felt a stir of unease myself. Let's check the source of that sound. We moved cautiously toward the source of the noise, hearts pounding in our chests. As we neared the back of the house, I could feel the weight of the tension in the air. Every breath seemed to get heavier, every movement was magnified, as if something were closing in on us. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, but the source of the noise was coming from one of the back rooms, an old cellar door at the end of the hall. It had been shut tight when we arrived, but now it was slightly ajar. A low, almost imperceptible hum emanated from within. This is it, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Whatever is going on here, it's coming from the cellar. With a deep breath, I pushed open the door. What we found inside I could never have predicted. The room was dark but faint. Ghostly symbols were painted across the walls, just like the ones we had found in the attic. In the center of the room was an altar, smeared with what looked like dried blood. And standing before it, just inches from the altar, was the maid. She was standing completely still, her eyes wide with terror, staring at something we couldn't see. Her lips moved in silent prayer, her hands trembling at her sides. She didn't even notice us enter. God help us, Archie muttered under his breath. I stepped forward, my mind racing. Whatever was happening here, the maid was at the heart of it. She had known more than she had let on. She wasn't just a helpless witness. She had been involved all along. And now, the ritual was nearing its completion. The question wasn't who had committed the murders anymore. It was what they had been trying to summon. And more importantly, had it already arrived? Chapter 5. The Final Revelation. The cellar was unnervingly cold. The air felt dense, suffocating, as though the very walls were alive and holding their breath. The faint symbols that had been painted on the walls seemed to twist and shift in the dim light, their meanings unknowable yet undeniably menacing. I stood at the threshold, trying to comprehend what was unfolding before me. The maid, her hands trembling, muttered incoherently, her eyes wide with terror. But her body remained motionless, fixed like a marionette whose strings had been pulled tight. Good God, Wolf, Archie said in a hushed tone, his voice shaky. What is going on here? I didn't answer immediately. My eyes remained fixed on the maid, who was now staring blankly at the altar in front of her. There was something deeply unsettling about her. She wasn't simply frightened. She was as though trapped in a trance, her very presence an unsettling fixture in this nightmare. But that wasn't what made my pulse quicken. It was the altar. The symbols on the altar matched those we had seen in the attic. The bloodstains were still fresh. They looked too deliberate, too purposeful. And as I took a step forward, the light from our torches revealed something else. 2 black candles, their flames flickering unnaturally in the stagnant air, casting strange, distorted shadows on the walls. I cleared my throat, my voice steady as I addressed the maid. "Ellen," I said, trying to reach her through the fog that seemed to cloud her mind. "Ellen, look at me." For a moment there was nothing, just the slow, rhythmic murmuring of her prayers. But then, as though hearing my voice for the first time, her eyes snapped to mine. A flicker of recognition, fear, passed over her face before she quickly dropped her gaze, staring at the ground. "Please do not," she whispered hoarsely, her voice trembling. "It's too late." The words hit me like a hammer. "Too late for what, Ellen? What are you trying to tell me?" She shuddered violently, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She clenched her fists as if fighting an invisible force, as if trying to break free from some unseen power that had a grip on her very soul. "You don't understand," she gasped. "The ritual. It's already begun." "It's too powerful to stop." I moved closer, lowering my voice. "The ritual, Ellen. What is it? Who else is involved?" Her gaze met mine again, and this time there was a flicker of defiance. She stood straighter, her voice suddenly more forceful, though still laced with dread. "I was chosen," she said, her eyes glassy, distant. "We were all chosen. The family. They were the key. They didn't know. They didn't understand what they were part of. The pieces were starting to come together, but the puzzle was still incomplete. The family. They didn't know?" I asked, stepping even closer. She shook her head, her face twisted with something akin to shame. "No. Carl thought it was just a ritual, just a way to gain power. But it was more. They all thought they were playing with ancient forces, but they didn't know they were opening a door that cannot be closed." My heart sank. The horror was becoming clear now. Carl, the father, had been drawn into something much darker than mere curiosity. He had believed he could control it, believed he could manipulate the ancient power he sought. But in doing so, he had unlocked something far worse. The ritual wasn't just a series of symbolic acts. It was a gateway, and once that door had been opened, it was too late to close it. "Ellen," I said, my voice firm, desperate for clarity. "Who else was involved in the ritual? Who are you protecting?" She hesitated for a moment, her lips trembling. I didn't mean to. I didn't want this to happen. But it's too late. He's coming. They're all coming." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And once they've taken everything, they will leave nothing but ashes." "Who?" Archie barked, stepping forward. "Who is coming?" Ellen raised her hand weakly, pointing toward the altar. "The one they called the Overseer. The Ancient One. The ritual. It wasn't meant for them. It was meant to awaken him." The room seemed to grow darker in that instant, as though the shadows were pulling closer, gathering around us. A chill ran through me, one that had nothing to do with the coldness of the cellar. "The Overseer?" I repeated. "Is that who killed them? Is that what you've summoned here?" Her lips quivered, but she said nothing more. She simply nodded, her body starting to shake with the fear of what she had done. It was then that I realized the true horror of this case had nothing to do with the family at all. They had been pawns, unwitting participants in a game they had no control over. The real force, the one pulling the strings, was far older and far more dangerous than anything I could have imagined. The Overseer. A name that whispered through the ages, a power that had been summoned by human greed, arrogance, and ignorance. The family had paid the price, but Ellen, the maid, had become a reluctant agent of something ancient and malignant. She had been caught in the web of the ritual, chosen not because of her actions, but because she had been the last piece to fall into place. "Ellen, we can stop this," I said urgently. "Tell me what I need to do. How do we stop it?" Her eyes flickered, a brief moment of clarity, but just as quickly they clouded over again. "There's nothing you can do now," she whispered. "It's already too late. The ritual's power can't be undone. It's been completed. He is here." Before I could react, the cellar's temperature dropped even further. A heavy, oppressive silence enveloped the room. For a moment I thought I could hear the faintest hum, like a distant, eerie chant reverberating through the walls. It was then that I realized what Ellen had been trying to say. The ritual had been completed, and the Overseer had already arrived. I spun around, scanning the room, searching for any sign of a physical manifestation. But there was nothing, just the dark, silent cellar. The hum grew louder, pulsing like the heartbeat of some unseen creature. The walls began to tremble. And then I heard it. A voice, low, whispering, familiar but impossible to place. It was as if the very fabric of the house was speaking to me, its words seeping into my mind. "You should have stopped it when you had the chance, Nero Wolfe. Now it's too late." I turned to Archie, my pulse quickening, but his face had gone pale. He was staring at something beyond me, something I couldn't yet see. Before I could speak, the ground beneath us shifted, the house groaning as if it were about to collapse. The air crackled with a dark energy, pressing in on us from every direction. And then, the shadows in the corners of the cellar began to move. Not inanimate shadows, living shadows. I turned to Ellen one last time, but she was gone. Her body lay lifeless on the cold stone floor, her soul consumed by whatever force she had invoked. The Overseer had come, and there was no stopping it now. The only question left was, would any of us survive the night? Chapter 6. The Descent into Darkness. The cellar had become an abyss, a void that seemed to swallow everything in its wake. The shadows in the corners of the room twisted, moving of their own accord, as if they had been brought to life by something far darker than we could comprehend. The air was thick with the oppressive weight of unseen forces, and the ground beneath us seemed to tremble, as though the house itself were alive, breathing with a malevolent rhythm. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering in my ears, watching the shadows writhe and coil like serpents. There was no sound, no whispers, no cries, just the hum of something ancient and terrible reverberating through the walls. It was as if the very fabric of reality was beginning to fray, to unravel, and we were caught in the middle of it. "Archie," I said, my voice steady despite the creeping dread that was consuming me. "Stay close. Don't move unless I say so." Archie didn't answer at first, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. I had seen him face many dangerous situations before, gunfights, shootouts, even death itself. But this was different. There was no clear enemy, no physical threat. The danger here was intangible, lurking in the shadows, in the very air we breathed, and it was closing in fast. I glanced at the maid's lifeless body, still lying on the cold stone floor. There was no sign of life in her now, no indication that the terror she had felt had passed. Her eyes were wide open, locked in an expression of abject horror, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she had been taken, consumed, by whatever dark force had entered the house. "What the hell is happening, Wolf?" Archie's voice cracked as he spoke, his hand shaking as he reached for the gun at his side. "What is that?" Before I could respond, a sound pierced the air, a low, guttural growl, as if the shadows themselves were alive and angry. It reverberated through the room, vibrating in my bones, and I knew instantly that the overseer was here. Whatever had been summoned by the ritual was not some abstract force. It was a presence, a consciousness that was as ancient as it was malevolent. The shadows seemed to writhe closer, stretching toward us, filling the room with their cold, suffocating presence. The air grew thick with a heavy fog that seemed to emanate from the very walls, crawling over our skin like ice. "Archie, we need to get out of here." "Now," I ordered, my voice harsh and urgent. But as we turned to move, the door slammed shut with a deafening crash. The entire cellar shook, and the faint hum from earlier intensified, reverberating like a pulse in the air. The walls themselves seemed to grow closer, the space around us contracting as though the house was drawing us in, trapping us inside with the thing that now haunted it. I reached for the door, but it was no use. The metal handle burned against my palm as I tried to turn it, and the door didn't budge. It was as though the house had locked us in with whatever had been summoned here. "Wolf, this isn't right," Archie shouted, his voice rising in panic. "What the hell do we do now? We're trapped." The growl from the shadows deepened, a sickening guttural sound that was almost too low to hear, but somehow it filled every corner of the room. The very air seemed to vibrate with the force of it, and then, from the dark, a figure slowly emerged. At first, it was just a shape, a shadow indistinct in the thick fog of the cellar. But as it drew closer, I could see it for what it truly was, the overseer. It was a figure cloaked in shadows, its outline indistinct, like it was made of darkness itself. It was tall, unnaturally so, and its presence exuded an aura of pure, suffocating malice. It had no face, no features, just an empty void where its eyes should have been, a blackness that seemed to swallow the light around it. Its form was shifting, constantly flickering like an old film reel, as though it couldn't fully hold its shape in our reality. But it was there, and it was coming toward us. "Do not resist," a voice echoed from the creature, not spoken aloud but felt deep within my mind, in the marrow of my bones. It was a voice that was ancient and powerful, a voice that had not been heard by human ears for centuries. "You are mine now." The voice washed over me like a wave of cold water, but I didn't flinch. I had faced danger before, but this was different. This was something that transcended human understanding, something that made my very existence seem insignificant. The overseer was not merely a creature of flesh and blood, it was a being that existed beyond our world, beyond time, beyond death. "Archie, listen to me," I snapped, turning to him. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with terror. "We have to move. We can't fight this thing. We need to find a way to escape." But as I spoke, the room seemed to shift again, the shadows growing thicker, more suffocating. The overseer's presence was overwhelming, crushing the very air from our lungs. It moved closer still, its dark form flickering and writhing, like it was trying to materialize in a world that wasn't meant for it. And then, with a sickening crack, the altar in the center of the room cracked open, revealing something hidden within, something alive, something that had been waiting. The overseer moved toward it, its form becoming more solid as it neared the altar. I watched in stunned silence as the dark figure extended its hand. Its hand was not solid, but composed of darkness itself. It reached toward the altar, and as it touched the surface, the ground beneath us trembled violently. The air grew thick with a stench of decay, and I could hear the faint sound of whispers. Thousands of voices, all speaking at once, filling the room with an overwhelming, maddening sound. We've awakened it," I whispered, the realization hitting me with a sickening weight. Whatever we do, it's too late to stop it. Archie's voice broke through my thoughts. What do you mean, we've awakened it? Wolf, what the hell is this thing? It's the overseer, I said quietly, the words heavy in my mouth. The ritual wasn't just about the family. They were the sacrifice, the key to summon it into our world. And now that it's here, there's no turning back. I turned to the altar, watching in horror as the shadow that was the overseer continued to manipulate the broken remnants, pulling something from within. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, and then, with one final motion, the overseer extended its hand, and a blinding light erupted from the altar, filling the room with a sickening, pulsing glow. For a brief, fleeting moment I thought I could see something within the light, something that wasn't just darkness, a form, a creature. But before I could make out what it was, the light surged outward, engulfing everything. The shadows came alive, twisting around us, as the overseer released a sound that wasn't a voice, but something worse, something that could not be described with mere words. And in that moment I realized what I had feared all along. The overseer had entered our world, and we were trapped, caught in its grip. Chapter 7. The final hour. The light that had erupted from the altar was like nothing I had ever experienced. Too bright, too overwhelming. It consumed the entire room, burning through every corner of the cellar, wrapping around us in an embrace of suffocating heat and blinding intensity. The very air seemed to twist and warp, and the walls began to tremble as if the house itself were coming apart. For a brief moment, everything seemed to collapse into a singularity of pure, unrelenting force. Then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the light receded, leaving us in an unnatural, suffocating darkness. I gasped for breath, my body shaking from the shock, but I forced myself to stand firm. The air was still thick with the oppressive presence of the overseer, and the whispers, those damnable whispers, filled my ears once more, echoing from the deepest corners of my mind. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, but their meaning was clear. This was no longer a matter of solving a mystery. This was about survival. I turned to Archie, who was clutching his gun with white knuckles, his face a mask of fear and disbelief. His eyes darted around the room, but there was nothing to see, just the oppressive dark, the heavy fog of terror that clung to everything. I knew he could feel it too, the pulse of something ancient, something alive, that was now within our world. Archie, I said, my voice steady, though inside I was reeling. We need to move now. This place is a trap and we're running out of time. What the hell is happening, Wolf? Archie's voice was raw, panic creeping in. What was that light? And that thing? What is that? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for certain. We were in the presence of something older than time itself. The overseer wasn't just some creature of legend. It was real, and it was now free in our world, its power unleashed. Before I could respond, the hum that had once been a faint whisper began to rise again, louder, more insistent this time. The shadows shifted around us, moving like sentient creatures, as if they were alive, pulling at the edges of the room, inching closer, encircling us. The air grew heavier, thick with the stench of decay, as though something rotten had been unearthed. The ground beneath us seemed to pulse, in time with the sound of the whispers, the air thick with an oppressive energy that felt like it was pushing in from all sides. I knew we had to escape. But how? The door to the cellar was still locked, and the overseer was not only a physical presence, it was a force that manipulated the very fabric of reality. Its power had torn through the veil between worlds, and now it was in control. I glanced around the cellar, searching for an escape route, but the room seemed to stretch and shrink in impossible ways. There was no exit, no way out. The walls were closing in, the shadows growing thicker, more malevolent. "Wolf, look," Archie cried out, pointing toward the far corner of the room. I turned quickly, my heart racing. The shadows there had begun to move, swirling into a singular mass, as if they were being drawn together by some unseen force. I watched in horror as the darkness coalesced into a figure, a shape that was tall, featureless, and utterly terrifying. It was the overseer, but it was no longer merely a shadow. It had begun to take shape, its form becoming more solid, more real. Its presence was unbearable, suffocating, as though it was pulling the very air from my lungs. The overseer's shape flickered, its edges indistinct, its form constantly shifting, as though it could not fully occupy our reality. But it was here, and it was far more terrifying than I had ever imagined. "You should have left when you had the chance," the voice whispered. No, not whispered. It spoke directly into my mind. It was the same voice we had heard before, the one that filled the room with dread, but this time it was clearer, more commanding, more insistent. "You were fools to come here. You awakened me, and now you will serve." The voice sent a tremor of fear through me, but I pushed it down. I had faced death before, but this was something beyond comprehension. This was an ancient evil that had crossed the threshold of time and space. "Archie, get ready," I muttered, taking a step back. "We're not dealing with a mere ghost or spirit. This is something much worse." The overseer moved toward us, its form growing more solid with every step. The ground seemed to shake beneath its weight, and I could feel the very walls of the house groaning as though they were bending to its will. "We cannot escape," the overseer continued, its voice reverberating in my skull. "You are trapped. Your souls will be mine, as all souls must be." I turned to Archie. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with terror. He had no idea how to fight this, how to combat something that was beyond human understanding. Neither did I. But I couldn't give in. I couldn't let this thing claim us without a fight. I pulled the gun from my holster, my hand steady despite the shaking of my heart. The bullet wouldn't kill it. It couldn't. But I had to do something. I had to try something, anything. "Don't shoot," I said, my voice sharp. "Bullets won't work on this. We need to find a way to sever its connection to this world. We need to—" Before I could finish, the overseer's shadowy form surged forward, its reach extending like a dark, clawed hand toward us. I barely had time to react before the shadows wrapped around my body, pulling me toward the creature, dragging me into its embrace. The air was thick with the stench of decay, of something ancient and rotten, and I could feel the very fabric of my being tearing apart. But then, something unexpected happened. As the shadows closed in around me, I felt a surge of power, an electric pulse, deep in the marrow of my bones. It wasn't the overseer's power. It was something else, something I hadn't expected. I turned to Archie, my eyes wide with realization. "The journal!" I cried. "The ritual, it's incomplete. It needs the final step." Archie looked at me, confused. "What the hell are you talking about?" I couldn't explain it all in the moment, but I knew what had to be done. The overseer was tied to the ritual, to the symbols, to the blood that had been spilled. If we could reverse the ritual, if we could find the final piece, the overseer would be banished back into the darkness from which it had come. But time was running out, and we were running out of options. I forced myself to step forward, ignoring the oppressive weight of the darkness that pressed in on me. I had one last card to play. One last chance to stop this nightmare before it consumed us all. "Archie," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. "Get the journal." We need to finish what Carl started. The overseer moved closer, its darkness suffocating, but I felt the flicker of hope ignite inside me. It wasn't too late. We still had a chance. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. The darkness in the cellar had grown deeper, more oppressive with each passing second. The overseer loomed closer, its figure shifting and pulsing, like a living shadow, casting long tendrils of blackness around the room. The air was thick with an unnatural cold, and the whispers, the terrible, maddening whispers, filled my mind, drowning out everything else. But even as the creature advanced, I held on to one thought, a single fragile thread of hope. The ritual was incomplete. The overseer, this ancient entity, was still bound to the very process it had been summoned by. If we could sever its connection to this world, if we could undo what Carl had set in motion, we might have a chance. Archie was still staring at me, his face a mixture of confusion and fear. I could see him struggling to understand what I was saying, what I was asking of him, but there was no time to explain. We had to act now, or we were lost. "Archie, the journal," I shouted again, my voice rising over the cacophony of whispers. "Get the journal. Now." He hesitated, his eyes darting around the room, but then something in my gaze must have convinced him. He turned and sprinted toward the cellar stairs, his footsteps echoing in the silence as he rushed to retrieve the journal. I couldn't afford to lose sight of him. If we were to have any hope of surviving this, we needed that journal, the final piece, to complete the ritual in reverse. The overseer was nearly upon me now. I could feel its presence, its crushing weight bearing down on my chest, as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. The shadows began to curl around my limbs, as though they were trying to wrap me in their suffocating embrace. But I fought against them, pushing back with every ounce of strength I had. My mind raced, searching for a way to stop this madness. I glanced up and saw Archie, his hands trembling, clutching the leather-bound journal. His face was pale, his breath shallow, but he was determined. He didn't speak, but his eyes said it all. "We do this together." I nodded, barely able to think over the growing pressure in my head. The overseer's presence was like a storm, rattling my bones, filling the very air with its malevolent power. But there was one thing the creature hadn't anticipated: human will. "Open the journal, Archie," I commanded. With trembling hands, Archie did as I said, flipping through the pages with frantic urgency. The symbols on the pages seemed to glow faintly, almost as if they were alive, responding to the energy in the room. I could feel them pulsing, their power thrumming through the air, aligning with the oppressive hum of the overseer's dark force. "Find the final step," I urged him, my voice tight with desperation. "The ritual's not finished. We need to finish it, the opposite way." Archie's eyes flicked over the pages, his brow furrowing in concentration. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, he found it. The final step, the one that could sever the overseer's hold on our world. "The binding," Archie muttered under his breath. "The reverse incantation. It's here, Wolf. It's right here." I felt a wave of relief flood through me. This is it. This was the chance we had been waiting for. "Read it, Archie," I shouted, the words tumbling from my lips in a near frenzy. "Now!" "Before it's too late." He didn't hesitate. Archie began to read aloud, his voice shaking at first, then gaining strength with each word. The incantation was long, and the language ancient, but it was a simple reversal of the ritual that had brought the overseer into this world. I could feel the power building in the air as Archie's voice rang out, each word pulling against the darkness, each syllable a tether pulling the overseer back to the void it had come from. The overseer screamed, not with a voice, but with the sound of the very universe tearing. The shadows that had been suffocating me seemed to writhe in agony, recoiling from the words. The air grew colder, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath me as the creature fought against the pull of the incantation. Its form flickered, unstable, as if it were being torn between dimensions. It tried to advance, but its movements grew erratic, like an insect caught in a trap. "Keep going, Archie," I urged, my voice raw. "Don't stop." But even as I spoke, I could feel the overseer's power surging against the reversal. It wasn't going down without a fight. The whispers in my mind grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel my strength waning, as if the very fabric of my being was being drawn into the creature's dark pull. And then, in an instant, it happened. A pulse of light, white, pure and blinding, exploded from the journal, surrounding us in a brilliant aura. The shadows screeched, recoiling violently as if they were being burned away. I felt the oppressive weight of the overseer's presence begin to lift, the darkness that had consumed the cellar slowly receding inch by inch. Archie continued to chant, his voice unwavering, until the light grew so intense that it filled the entire room. For a split second, I thought I could see the overseer's true form, something twisted, something monstrous, something that existed beyond comprehension. But in the next moment it was gone. The light flickered, then vanished, leaving only the silence. The air was still, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the weight on my chest lifted. "Wolf, it's over," Archie whispered, his voice low, almost disbelieving. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. The shadows were gone. The creature was gone. The presence that had filled the room was nothing more than a distant memory now, fading with every passing second. The oppressive energy that had weighed us down was gone, leaving only the quiet hum of the house. I looked at Archie, my heart still pounding, my body aching from the strain of what had just transpired. "We did it, Archie," I said, my voice hoarse. "We stopped it." But as I spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something inside the house, something deep within the very walls. The overseer was gone, yes, but the house still felt different. The weight of history, the darkness it had held, lingered, faint but present, like a scar that wouldn't heal. The journal, the ritual, the sacrifice. It was over, but the cost had been steep. And even though the creature was banished, I couldn't help but wonder how much of it had been left behind, how much of the darkness had seeped into this world, leaving traces that we couldn't yet understand. The house was still standing, the horrors of the past just a whisper now, but for how long? And what of the future? What other forces were waiting to be uncovered? I turned to Archie. "Let's go home, Archie. It's over, for now." But as we walked toward the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that this place, this nightmare, had left its mark on us, and the echoes of the overseer would remain long after we were gone. The end. Or is it? Chapter 9. Echoes in the dark. The house, though still standing, no longer felt like a place of safety. The walls, once steeped in silence, now carried an eerie hum, as though the very foundation was remembering the horrors that had taken place within. The overseer was gone, but something had been left behind, something we couldn't yet understand. It was the kind of unsettled peace that comes after a storm, where the wind has died, but the air still feels charged. We stood in the doorway of the cellar, staring down at the darkness that had consumed everything. The journal, the final piece, lay in my hands. It had been the key to undoing the ritual, to banishing the entity that had been summoned here. But even as I held it, I could feel its weight differently now, as if it too had changed. There was a strange energy in it, something faint but palpable, like the echo of an ancient force that had been disturbed. "I don't like this, Wolf," Archie said, his voice low, his eyes scanning the space around us. "It feels unfinished. You sure this is over?" I didn't answer immediately. I had been wondering the same thing. The overseer had been banished, yes, but the ritual had been real. The house had been a conduit, a gateway, and even though we had closed it, I couldn't help but wonder what had seeped through. What we had felt, the weight, the presence, the whispers, those weren't just figments of our imagination. They were real, and real things didn't just fade away into nothing. "We've stopped it for now," I finally said, my voice steady, though the uncertainty gnawed at me. But I can't shake the feeling that the house, the place itself, is still tethered to whatever happened here. We need to leave. Now Archie gave a nervous laugh, but there was little humor in it. "You're telling me?" "This whole thing feels like a ticking time bomb," I turned, scanning the rest of the farmhouse. It was strangely quiet now. Too quiet. I had expected a moment of calm after the storm, a sense of relief. Instead, there was only a thick, suffocating silence that seemed to press in on me from all sides. The air tasted stale, like it hadn't been breathed in years. "We need to go, Wolf," Archie repeated, more urgently this time, "before something else happens." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. We weren't just leaving this house physically. We were leaving with more than our lives. We had been touched by something darker than any case I had ever solved, something that stretched beyond time and space. But could we really leave it behind? Could we really walk away from the dark presence we had woken? My gaze flicked back to the cellar stairs. The door to the attic was still closed. The dark corners of the house, which had once seemed like simple abandoned spaces, now felt like they were hiding something. Something that had been there long before the murders, long before the ritual. "Wolf?" Archie's voice broke through my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. "Are you coming?" I gave one last look at the house, then followed him into the hallway. We made our way to the front door, my steps slower than usual. There was a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't shake, a weight that had nothing to do with the case. I had seen things I could not explain, had touched things beyond my comprehension, and no matter how many miles I put between myself and this place, I had the feeling that the echoes of what had happened here would follow me. As I stepped out onto the porch, I took a deep breath, trying to shake the sense of unease that still clung to me. The night was dark, the stars hidden behind thick clouds. The wind had picked up, and the cold bite of the air made me shiver. But even the crispness of the night couldn't clear the fog in my mind. It was as though the house was still there, still watching, still lingering in the edges of my thoughts. "Ready?" Archie asked, his voice tense. I looked over at him, and for a moment I saw the same doubt in his eyes that I felt gnawing at me. "Not really," I replied honestly. "But we don't have a choice." We walked toward the car, and I could feel the house behind me, even though I didn't look back. The sound of our footsteps was swallowed by the oppressive silence. The shadows from the farmhouse seemed to stretch out toward us, as though they were trying to follow us, to keep us tethered to the place that had nearly consumed us. As we climbed into the car, I couldn't help but glance at the house one last time. There was no movement, no lights in the windows, but I knew better than to think it was over. Whatever had happened here, whatever dark force had been released, was not something that could be easily erased. The house would remain, an empty monument to a horror long forgotten by time, waiting for the next fool to awaken it. I slammed the car door shut and started the engine. The tires kicked up gravel as we pulled away from the farmstead, the headlights casting long, eerie shadows behind us. But no matter how fast we drove, no matter how far we went, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house, the overseer, and the darkness that had filled it were all still there, lurking in the background, waiting for the next chapter to begin. The case was closed, yes. The ritual had been reversed, the entity banished. But the echoes of what had happened here would remain with me, lingering, haunting, always there in the quiet moments when I least expected it. And deep down, I knew that one day, the echoes would come calling again. Chapter 10. The Weight of the Past. The miles between us and the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse stretched out in a blur of headlights and fading moonlight. The car hummed along the winding roads, the night air chilling as it rushed past the open windows. Archie sat beside me, his face pale, his mind still wrestling with the horrors we'd left behind. I could tell he was trying to process everything, just as I was. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, something that hinted at the gnawing uncertainty that hadn't yet let go of him. We'd escaped, yes. But had we truly escaped? The question haunted me as we drove, the road ahead of us clear, but my thoughts tangled in the web of unanswered questions. I knew that the ritual, the overseer, was over, for now. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness had marked us, had touched us in a way we could never truly escape. I kept telling myself that it was done, that the creature had been banished, the house left behind. But the truth of it was far more complicated. The quiet in the car felt unnatural, a silence too heavy for words. Every time I glanced at Archie, his eyes would flick to me, as though waiting for me to explain it all. The why, the how, the what now. But there was no easy explanation. We had faced something beyond comprehension, beyond the realm of the logical and the understandable. The ritual had been completed, the entity had been banished, but we both knew it wasn't over. Finally, Archie broke the silence. "So, what now?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. "You're telling me that we just left? That's it? No answers? No more to this story?" I glanced at him, my hands tight on the wheel. "We stopped the ritual. We stopped the overseer. That's all we can do. But the house, what about it? And the journal? What about the symbols?" He was pacing through his thoughts out loud now, the frustration palpable in his voice. "You said it wasn't over." I sighed, glancing out at the road ahead. The trees that flanked the sides of the road seemed to warp in the periphery of my vision, stretching in the night like shadows that didn't quite belong. "I don't know, Archie," I admitted, my voice strained with the weight of the past few days. "I think the house, the place itself, it's still tied to something. We reversed the ritual, we banished the overseer, but there's more to the story. There always is more." "What do you mean, more?" I tightened my grip on the wheel as a sharp chill crept through me. The weight of the house, of the past, had settled deep within me. The house wasn't just a place. It wasn't just a farmstead. It was a conduit, a bridge to something else. And when we closed the ritual, we severed the connection to that thing. But that doesn't mean it's gone. It's still in the house, in the land, in the soil. The energy that was released doesn't just fade. I could see the skepticism in Archie's eyes as he turned toward me. "So, what? You think it's still there?" "I don't know," I said, my voice quieter now. "But I know this. Things like that, they don't just disappear. The force, the power, it leaves a mark. It changes everything around it. And the house, it's still there. It's not just the people who were sacrificed. It's the place itself, the land, the foundation. It carries the history of what happened." Archie leaned back in his seat, still processing. So you're saying that even though we stopped it, the land itself is cursed? I nodded slowly, the realization settling in. Yes, I think the curse is part of the land now. The ritual was meant to bind the creature, to allow it to pass through. But the house, it's a focal point for something far older than we are. Something that was there long before we arrived. We were quiet for a long time as the miles passed, the road stretching out endlessly in front of us, but neither of us truly feeling like we were moving forward. The weight of what we had experienced, what we had seen, didn't lift. It clung to me, like a shadow that refused to let go. The whispers, the faint echoes of the overseer's voice still haunted the edges of my mind, their presence lingering in the silence between us. I knew it wasn't over. Not for me, not for Archie, not for anyone who had been touched by the horrors of Hinterkaifeck. Wolf, Archie finally spoke again, his voice softer this time, a hint of something uncertain in it. What happens if someone else comes along? What if they find the house or the journal? What if they try again? I didn't answer right away. I didn't have a clear answer. What I did know, however, was that the world was a vast and complicated place, and there were forces at play in it that could never be fully understood by any one person. Some things, some darkness, were too ancient, too powerful, to ever be fully erased. Even if we had stopped it for now, even if the ritual was undone, the potential for it to rise again would always remain. It would be there, lingering in the forgotten places, waiting for the next set of curious souls to stumble across it. You can't stop things like this forever, Archie, I said finally, my voice heavy. You can only delay them. The darkness will always be there, waiting for its chance to return. But we stopped it, he said, his voice firm. We stopped it this time. I turned to him, meeting his gaze. Yes, we did. But there will always be others, Archie. There will always be another ritual, another gateway, another fool who believes they can control the darkness. And when that happens, we won't be there to stop it. There was a long pause. I could see the uncertainty in Archie's eyes, the weight of the words sinking in. He had been part of something beyond comprehension, something that stretched far beyond the realm of logic and reason. And like me, he knew that it wasn't truly over. We drove on in silence, the hum of the tires on the road the only sound filling the car. The past would always be with us. The mystery of Hinterkaifeck, the house, the ritual, it was no longer just a case. It had become a part of us, an indelible mark that couldn't be erased. The house was still out there, waiting. And no matter how far we drove, no matter how much time passed, we both knew that some part of it would follow us, shadowing our every step. Because there was one thing we had learned the hard way. The darkness that had touched the Hinterkaifeck farmhouse hadn't just been summoned into our world. It had never really left. And someday, it would return. The end.